Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, August 11th, 2022. Time for another show. I was distracted in the run-up to the show, but I don't think it'll make much of a difference in the production of the actual show, except that it'll change directions for us, at least in the first couple choices of stories. I was winding things down and looking to start up with our introduction and interlude music to cue things up for our 9:01 beginning. I don't know how we got to that convention, but I think that was basically a concession to the fact that it was possible that things wouldn't sync up exactly right and we give ourselves the first minute to make everything work, but okay. At any rate, I was distracted by, I guess, a dumb email. I guess that's the way you would have to describe it. It did come in an email, and it was remarkably dumb. I get a lot of dumb emails. Most of my email is dumb. Not from you guys. It's mostly stuff like... Actually, a good portion of my email is eaten up with things like this. Items that you get from PR people trying to sell some guest on the show or something. And this is... You don't have to have a podcast to do this, by the way. I mean, hardly anybody knows that I have a podcast. I don't know how it happens, but all right, you get on these lists, and I as I recall, it happened even before that I did any sort of podcast. So these PR companies are always trying to pitch you some expert or another, either that you should blog about, or I guess if you have a podcast, have them on your podcast. That has never worked. I don't believe I've ever gotten an email from a PR person saying I have a guest availability and you should take advantage of it. And I said, yeah, or even, yeah, I'll open the email. But this time I opened the email because there's a lot of dumb stuff going on. And this morning, a lot of dumb pitches. For you dumb pitches, I'm going to knock you out. All right, well, anyway, look, this morning, one of the things going on is I see people reacting to Frank Luntz, who I guess has been enjoying something of a renaissance these days because he's sort of anti-Trump and people have been listening to him more often than usual, is still a Republican and still a terrible Republican and still largely responsible for a lot of what goes on these days. Because to the extent that, I guess, who is it? Dana Milbank, I guess, has got a new book coming out. I guess that's what we read the other day. I thought he was just writing a particularly poignant piece about how Newt Gingrich was responsible for so much of the garbage happening today with Trump and others. And as it turns out, it was an excerpt from his book, and he was, drumming up sales for it, which is what you're supposed to do with a book. That's not unusual. And it was a good piece, and I was glad to read it, and it made some excellent points. Not that they were new points, as I have also seen in the past couple of days, people pointing out, a lot of liberals used to say the same thing and were sort of like excoriated for doing it, and how dare you, and now it's, mainstream book worthy, so people are cashing in on it. And, it's a book that needed to be written, so whatever. I'm glad. At any rate, Frank Luntz, of course, was one of the chief strategists behind Newt Gingrich and his rise to power, and literally engineered the words that Gingrich used to rise to power and then briefly hold on to power before being chucked out on his ass from power. And now, 25 years since he's been elected to anything, he's still on the news telling people what they ought to be doing and what they ought to be thinking. Anyway, that wasn't the dumb news necessarily that triggered this, but Luntz was on TV, I guess trying to downplay / undermine and now just outright attack the idea of a 0% CPI figure for July, which led people to say, well, what that means is inflation in July was at 0%. There was no more rise in the consumer price index than there had been over previous month or the previous year. But he was taking great umbrage at this and saying that it was Orwellian and how dare the president get on there while people are struggling to make ends meet and say that there was zero inflation, which is not, of course, what was actually said. It was simply that in July, there was no additional inflation above and beyond that which we had struggled through over the past, the balance of the past year. Whatever. Anyway, that they're trying to pitch from the PR services, not to Luntz himself, but everybody else who will come on your show and tell you that it's all a lie, even though it's not all a lie. But then there was another one, the one that actually caught my eye, guest availability here, the headline being, "The FBI Blue Jacket, which as of August 8th became the ultimate symbol of terror." Now, I had to open it because, of course, the August 8th reference there and the becoming a symbol of terror, it refers to the service of the warrant at Mar-A-Lago, Groom-A-Lago, as I've been calling it lately, even more pointed than Perv-A-Lago. This Perv-A-Lago, just sort of general perversion, specific type of Groom-A-Lago. Anyway, the service of that warrant, of course, was extraordinarily low-key, and the FBI and all the reporters covering it have made a point of saying that they, one, waited for a time when Donald Trump himself would not be at Mar-a-Lago, so there was no disruption to him personally, and two, that they made a point of showing up without those blue jackets, the windbreakers that say FBI on the back. So to the extent they've become the ultimate symbol of terror, they didn't have anything to do with August 8th, but that's the date that this dummy calls out. Who is this idiot? It is Nina May. That's the person that they're pitching here at Truth PR, which I don't know whether that has anything to do with his Truth Social or anything like that, but guest name Nina May, the conservative pundit. And what a terrific title for that person. Very creative. She's conservative. She's a pundit. She's the conservative pundit. An author, political commentator, film producer. The raid heard round the world is what she's trying to pitch. And if you take a look at this first paragraph, just to get some taste for what she's up to, the FBI has become a domestic terrorist group, yet they have the cojones. Oh my God, arrest her for speaking Spanish, by the way. The cojones, that's the word she's picked up in Spanish. That's just terrific. To do what? To say traditional symbols of liberty like the Betsy Ross flag, the Gadsden flag, anything with the Alamo, etc. What the are you talking about? Are icons of white supremacy and domestic terrorism. Okay, we need to add to that the FBI Blue Jacket, which as of August 8th, where they were nowhere to be seen, became the ultimate symbol of terror, except that they weren't used at all, and it doesn't make any sense. I think what she's alluding to is that at some hearings at the Judiciary Committee, I believe in the Senate, there was some indication that federal law enforcement sometimes took as a cue that you might be looking at, one of many cues that you might be looking at domestic terrorists / white supremacist groups, would be the prominent display of these niche flags, for instance, as they, I don't know where the Betsy Ross thing came in, but I guess their 1776 enthusiasm might be driving it. The Gadsden flag, etc. I don't know where the Alamo thing comes from. I've never seen that. Oh, that might be the come and take it flag. I believe that's what they're talking about. At any rate, those things are all true, and the people that the FBI should be focusing on very frequently associate themselves with those symbols, but no, they never declared those things are terrorist symbols. The way this idiot is doing about an FBI jacket that wasn't even there. I don't know. I was incensed by the fact that I gather this person is paying Truth PR, and whatever money they have to do that with are ill-gotten gains, in my view, and ought much better to be directed to me. I'll take them, and then I'll give some to Greg for coming in and sitting patiently while I rant about some stupid PR thing I should have been ignoring, like I have for the past 100 times they've attempted to influence me.
Did you write them back and say, "Sir, this is a Wendy's"?
I'm about to, but I guess I have to pick something new and different. Sir, this is a Gadsden flag factory. Leave me alone. So, yeah, I don't know. This is really incredible. Between this and Frank Luntz and the various other coordinated PR efforts to get on and say that the FBI are now domestic terrorists and the enemy, and also just pondering how that doesn't play somehow as defund the police, I don't know. But questions are on all of our minds.
Well,
there are
I
other
wonder if
questions.
you should just write them and say,
You may know them.
Dearest one, if you send me your bank account, I'll split with you my $3 billion in African currency.
Yes.
And see if the spam filters, form a singularity that just sucks all the spam into it and it disappears.
Anything's possible at this point. This email does go on at some length and pulls out all of these tropes that are just unbelievable. They are furious at things that Joe Biden said that you and I would have no clue that he even used the words. They've been harping on these things for months. Once he said this thing, and I'm so furious. Anyway, all right, that's where the rest of the world is. Not us, though. We have other stories.
We do, so let's look at this Mar-A-Lago sort of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of stories about that.
Seriously.
And again, once it happened, it was going to be the dominant story for days, and still is and will be, because it's absolutely not only unpresidential, but it's unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because we never had a crook who is an out-and-out grifter. So obviously displayed in the White House before. Well, they never raided a president's house before. Well, the president never really stole stuff from the White House in such a brazen way before.
Yeah, and they probably didn't even come for the towels and ashtrays.
He figured that was, the bathrobe and the towels are just mine,
Right.
That's what happens.
I mean,
when
you know what? Honestly, keep them. Jeez.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it.
If you want to leave and take them with you, leave. Just
my God. Yeah, I mean, one, anything to get you out the door, and two, I can pretty much tell you, if I were the president succeeding, to be like, yeah, Trump's personal effects, I'd burn him if I were you.
Mm.
All right,
so,
well, none of that.
Every time I think about Mar-a-Lago, I always think about, the great house tours. You can go and see the Vanderbilt mansion up on the Hudson, and, the giant bedroom where, he was the little boy playing at being a king, because there's all these crowns and stuff carved into the ceiling so you could see them when you're, when you're on the bed and stuff. And, that's Mar-a-Lago to Trump. He lives in 3 rooms of a country club.
Yeah.
It's not his house. And, of course, he's not there in the summer because it's too hot. Yeah, so people said, they did it while he wasn't there, so they didn't confront him. And other people said, they did it when Tucker Carlson was on vacation because they didn't dare cross him, and, all this other nonsense. They did it when they were ready to do it. And, the big story, of course, is how did they know what was there, and how did they know where everything was, and why did they do it now and not before? And so let's start with Political Playbook this morning. This is where the gossip columns really come in handy because they're just fun to read.
All right.
Political Playbook informant reports Jolt Trump World.
Jolt Trump World. Okay.
Trump World was jolted by reports of an informant.
I gotcha. All right.
Right. This is the time where Trump turns around and looks at everybody and says, is you writing down a criminal conspiracy?
Yes, I did see circulate the Lincoln.
Well, it started.
People, whatever.
Yes, it started from Newsweek, which nobody trusts, but the Wall Street Journal had a corresponding piece. So there are 2 stories worth your time this morning. One about Donald Trump in the Wall Street Journal, one about Joe Biden in the Washington Post. They intersect. First, there's the government informant inside Trump's inner circle. That's the takeaway from the Wall Street Journal, who retell the tale of the Mar-a-Lago report with important new details. It was in Newsweek, but nobody trusts Newsweek. On June 3rd, Jay Bratt, Chief of Counterintelligence and Export Control at the Department of Justice, the guy in charge of looking to see what robes and towels you took. By this point in his standoff with the government, Trump had already returned 15 boxes. Trump, who stopped by the June inspection to greet Bratt, had told the government there wasn't anything else. So
and you're in trouble.
Things started to escalate, and 5 days later, Bratt sent Trump's lawyer an email, a copy of which was read over the phone to the Wall Street Journal. We asked that the room at Mar-a-Lago where the documents had been stored be secured, and that all the boxes that were moved from the White House be preserved in that room in their current condition until further notice. So they put a padlock on the door. Then on June 22nd, the government subpoenaed surveillance footage.
Yes.
And then on Monday, the FBI warrant was executed. So I guess the FBI wanted to know who went in the room. And by the way, which foreign nationals were just there taking pictures and doing, live blogging of going through the boxes.
Unboxing of the secrets stolen from the White House. Excellent.
Right. So the mystery is what changed, and the answer, according to the journal, is that an informant told the FBI Trump was lying. Somebody familiar with the stored papers told investigators there may be more classified documents, and not only was Trump lying, according to the informant, this Trump insider knew exactly where they were. Well, everybody knew where they were. They were in that storage room with the lock on it.
Yeah, the storage room might be a library or a display cabinet. I mean,
one doesn't know. So the raid of Mar-A-Lago was based largely on information from an FBI confidential human source, HUMINT, as they say, one who was able to identify what classified documents Trump was still hiding and the location of the documents. And then, the second story that they go over is the historians meeting with Biden and Biden explaining to them and them explaining to him that everybody understands that this is pre-Civil War and we understand what authoritarians are doing and Viktor Orban and Europe and everything else, and I'm not stupid. And the question is, how do you combat it? Do you confront it, or do you simply govern properly as an example of an alternative way to do it? And Biden has chosen the govern properly, which is why this week is such a big deal in terms of all the stuff that he's accomplished. In fact, this was on Morning Joe this morning, this list, President Biden's big wins. Okay. The Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, the PACT Act, bipartisan gun law, killed al-Qaeda leader, gas prices going down, huge jobs numbers, low unemployment, confirmation of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, Ukraine, NATO expansion, the American Rescue Plan, bipartisan infrastructure law, Senate negotiating update to the Electoral Count Act. Actually, that's a pretty darn good record to run on. And so, the second part of what we're going to talk about is how Democrats do that. But the point they're trying to make is that Biden is not only on a roll, but it has implications in regard to the argument that Democrats will make that the other guys are basically insurrectionists, and you have an alternative choice here, which is Democrats who actually govern properly. So we have a track record. Yes, it can be done. Uncle Joe got it done in partisan Washington because he's a bipartisan kind of guy, kept that promise. This is what came out of it. Not so bad. Good record. Lots more to do. We understand that housing prices and food prices are driving your angst, but we have plans for that. But this is what we have accomplished, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, all part and parcel of the bigger picture. The other story in Politico, Trump world gripped with anger and fear and a host of conspiracies about the FBI search. I can tell you, all of us agree this is corrupt, said Michael Caputo, a longtime Trump confidant. I was looking for consigliere here in the story, whose service in the Trump administration was marked by attacks he waged on career officials and an acrimonious exit. Yes. There's no evidence that the Department of Justice did anything improper, and in fact it obtained approval, et cetera, et cetera. More information will be available soon, but in the absence, Trump allies have begun pushing conspiracies to explain away the probe. We talked about that yesterday. Asymmetric environment, they get to talk. Justice can't talk. They are planting the idea that evidence was planted. That means, in fact, there's evidence.
Yes, planted or not.
So, all of that's important. And in the 48 hours since the search, Trump Save America PAC released a new political ad linking the search to New York Attorney General Letitia James, which is important because yesterday he spent 6 hours saying, I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth, I want 4 more years plus a fifth, I want another fifth, give me another fifth, pour another fifth, Right. So that doesn't look so great. And between Kevin McCarthy and Elise Stefanik, they're now talking about when we get control, we're going to do Benghazi all over again. Yeah. Which is a reminder to Democrats why you have to get out and not let them have control.
Yeah. Well, it's your job, everybody.
Right. And then this is all with the backdrop of David Rothkopf writing in the Daily Beast. Look, folks, you have to remember Trump has always been a national security threat from the get-go, from the time that he was running with the Russian stuff, which is in fact real. And the Mueller report mentioned that there's a lot of context there. We know that Paul Manafort admitted to being in contact with Russian agents, Klimnik and others, and passing poll information to them. He's a security threat. Mar-a-Lago's a security threat. It's not secure. They walked up and said hi in the FBI, and they said, okay, fine, come on in. the safe is in the back. And so, the idea that the foreign nationals could join the club, be part of the staff, hold parties there, all of which is documented, makes that a completely unsafe environment. And why do I bring all of that up? Because the probability is that the Justice Department did the raid and wanted the documents because Trump is a security threat. And so they acted on what they thought was in the best interest of the country. And so they did the impoundment of the material. Whether an indictment's coming from that, whether it's part of a bigger picture indictment, which we'll talk about in a moment, because Pennsylvania and Scott Perry's phone, Pennsylvania legislatures have been subpoenaed by the Justice Department. That's a separate probe that's looking at fake electors. Whether this had anything to do with that, totally unclear, probably not. The Justice Department's big enough to run on separate tracks. So this is all probably trying to document the fact that Trump had stuff he's not supposed to have. He's a security threat. It's classified information. We need to go get it. He's lying to us. There's no reason to negotiate. And as somebody else put it, and he's learned a tremendous amount from the Bill Barr Mueller situation, whereby you don't let him have months and years to negotiate because he'll just stonewall you and, he's lying. So if somebody, in fact, told them, no, there's documents here and here's where they are, they went and got them.
Yeah. And that may be all there is to it. That's entirely possible. We kind of explored that a little bit yesterday. And, you need to be prepared for the possibility that the seizure of the documents is what it was about. And the documents seized aren't confessions to anything in particular. They just are what they are, and he had them and he shouldn't have, and now we've got him back, and that's it.
Right. Marcy Wheeler wrote a nice piece essentially with the theme that Trump keeps using the word cooperate. I don't think that word means what you think it means. And basically saying that, look, if somebody subpoenas you or if the FBI shows up at your door with a search warrant and legitimately comes and impounds material that they have a right to have, that's not cooperating. That's
you didn't shoot at them when they
and
did
they every time they get subpoenaed and forced to do something, they claim they're cooperating. What they are doing is complying, and that's it. And so whenever you see the word cooperate from the Trump camp,
good point.
Put the word complying in there because that's what it really means.
Yes. I mean,
and
the
she's
fact
yelling
that
at legal reporters who should know better and should know the difference, but she's informing the rest of us there is a difference.
There is, and she's absolutely right. If you are at the subpoena point, that is because you have rejected a simple request. All of these things, you see that all the time when the January 6th committee was really just beginning its work, and they would say things like, well, we invite so-and-so to come and testify. And people would say, I can't, what is this invitation? They're going to ignore that. Just subpoena them already. Well, yeah, they will do that. That's the point. But the subpoena comes after the invitation. You invite them to come. They don't cooperate. And so then you subpoena them and force them to comply. Marcy is exactly right. Good point, and people forget that.
So Tim Alberta has a fascinating piece. Now, remember, he's a conservative writer, very good writer, normal person, though, and has a lot of ties to the conservative world.
Still normal.
And, I'll talk about a Jonah Goldberg, same idea, piece, which is also really good. But this one in The Atlantic by Tim Alberta, if Donald Trump committed crimes on his way out of the White House, he should be subject to the same treatment as any other alleged criminal.
Well, sure.
The reason for this is simple. Ours is a government of laws, not of men. As John Adams once observed, and nobody is above the law. That's what it means when that side says, oh, if it could happen to him, it could happen to you. No, if it could happen to you, it could happen to him because nobody's above the law. We talked about that yesterday.
It's supposed to happen to you.
Right. But Tim Alberta says, so why do I feel nauseous watching coverage of this? Because this country is tracking toward a scale of political violence not seen since the Civil War. It's evident to anybody who spends significant time dwelling in the physical or virtual spaces of the American right. Go to a gun show, visit a right-wing church, check out a Trump rally. No matter the venue, the doomsday prophesying is ubiquitous and scary. And remember, prophecy is part of the deal because this is Christian nationalism, white Christian nationalism.
Christian nationalism.
Whenever
Super Christian.
And wherever I've heard hypothetical scenarios, he writes, of imminent conflict articulated. And that all came up after the raid when everybody was showing lock and load. Now is the Civil War, et cetera, et cetera. The premise rests on an egregious abuse of power, typically Democrats weaponizing agencies of the state to target their political opponents. I've always walked away from these experiences thinking to myself, if America's a powder keg, one overreach by the government, real or perceived, could light the fuse. And you think I'm being hysterical? I've been accused of that before, but we see what happens when millions of Americans abandon their faith in the nation's core institutions. We've seen what happens when millions of Americans become convinced that their leaders are illegitimate. We've seen what happens when millions of Americans are manipulated into believing that Trump is suffering righteously for their sake, that an attack on him is an attack on them, on their character, on their identity, on their sense of sovereignty. And I think we're going to see it again. I fear we're going to see it again.
Yes. Well, likely true. If only it were an attack on them. But it's not, but that's the way they feel, and that's the important part.
Right. So he goes ahead and he talks about why he feels that way, but that's because of all the different conversations he's had here, there, and everywhere else, which you all know about.
Yeah.
Is justice worth the associated risk? Yesterday, the nation's top law enforcement officers decided it was. We can only hope they were correct.
Yes.
But again,
you know.
The alternative is not doing anything, and that's far worse. So we know
really
that.
Is.
So I think it's a
just
settled argument, even though, his point is clear. There's going to be consequence to this, and we ought to be aware of the consequences. So the FBI is, because Chris Wray is the one that made a statement, not Merrick Garland. And Wray said, we're aware that when people threaten the FBI and other law enforcement, that's a big deal. We take it seriously.
Oh, good. Should. They're one of the few people out there equipped to handle dealing with threats like that. Everybody else has to. When they get the threats, they report them to the FBI. This cuts out the middleman. I like
exactly. That. So Jonah Goldberg's piece, Yearning for a Banana Republic, we'll do after the break.
All right. Jonah's yearning for something and banana, and I don't know. It sounds pretty weird. But okay. Well, we'll check that out after the break. I believe you. Even though Jonah Goldberg wrote it. It should be very exciting.
I'm going to surprise you.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm ready for my surprise now. Something about bananas and...
splits.
Yes. What's his name? Jonah Goldberg. Who is
Jonah Goldberg is talking about the split in this country, which is driven by bananas, so that's obviously a banana split. The title of his article is Yearning for a Banana Republic. Emboldened by fever dreams of persecution, Republicans want nothing more than to anoint a strong man to punish their enemies. And that really gets to the heart.
They always did want that, yes.
Yeah, of what's going on here.
All right.
They think they're right, and they hate everybody who doesn't agree with them, and they want to punish them. And that's at really the bottom of their entire approach to politics.
I feel
and that's why they like
of
Trump.
that. Yes. I mean, I don't like Trump, but at some point you do begin to feel the attraction of, you know what, I think I hate some of these people and wish that they would be punished too. But luckily we already have an infrastructure for punishing them and determining whether or not it's actually fair to do that. So
writing in the Dispatch, Jonah Goldberg says, look, let's put aside any consideration of primaries or policy debate and simply anoint a strong man to redeem our nation, purge corruption, and punish our enemies.
Yeah.
I'll put it plainly. If your belief, he writes, in our country is so fragile and pathetic that you will lose hope for our nation unless Donald Trump is given free rein to cleanse the land of evildoers, then you don't actually believe in this nation. If your love of country is contingent on your preferred faction being in power, you've confused partisanship for patriotism. Taken seriously, all this banana republic talk is un-American. And I don't mean it's wrong or flawed or an argument I don't like, although it's all those things. I mean it's literally un-American. when Joe Biden sermonized about unity under his banner was the answer to all our problems, I trotted out all my arguments against cult of unity, which constantly threatens our constitutional system of separated powers. Don't forget he's a conservative. You always have to put conservative stuff in here, otherwise you lose your audience. And the only people reading them will be me. Presidents are not redeemers, messiahs, incarnations of mystical aspirations, or righteous settlers of seething grievances. They're not God kings or the fathers of our American family. They're politicians elected to do some specific things as the head of one branch of one level of government. They get that job for a limited and defined period of time. Afterwards, they're citizens. It's a source of constant consternation and amazement for me, Jonah Goldberg, that so many people either don't understand this or pretend not to.
Yes.
And what he completely misses is white Christian nationalism and Christo-fascists.
Yeah.
It's a cult. And so just like when you go to church and your preacher tells you this is the right way to do it, and if you don't do it my way, you're going to burn in hell, that's what motivates them. So, of course, they're looking for a redeemer, a messiah, an incarnation of mystical aspirations. It's exactly what they believe, and that's what they want.
Especially when it will tell you you don't have to shed your bad habits. If they can't get that, they'll take a Fuhrer.
Yeah,
which is what they end up with. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting combination of a prophet and Fuhrer, right? What if all of these things were scaring you and you wanted everything done the correct way, but you also were admonished occasionally in church that, you needed to be kind or love your neighbors, and you're like, yuck, my neighbors are gross. And somebody said, you know what? I offer you a way to get all of the deliverance from hell, but visit all that damnation on the people you hate, and it's okay. Well, all right. What are you talking about? I'm talking about Trumpism. Let's go. Why don't we try?
Just to step back a little bit, somebody else writing about something different, Dark Brandon, was talking about the difference between the left and the right.
Okay.
Basically, the left has a sense of humor and the right doesn't. So when supporters of Biden or just like ordinary people, have this little Dark Brandon meme where you have his head on top of the sandworm of Dune, God Emperor of Dune, or, Joe Biden wears the aviator sunglasses, but somehow or other behind it, Cyclops beams from the X-Men are coming out of his eyes. It's funny because it's so stupid because it's obviously not true. When the right does it, you believe it. And that's why they put Trump's head on Rambo's body.
You think I guess at some point they might believe that he's actually, muscular and tough looking.
Right, because Ronnie Jackson said so.
Yeah.
So it must be true.
Shaped like a weevil,
the differences between the two, this isn't, both sides. It's completely asymmetric. And so they are looking for a redeemer. They are looking for a messiah, and that's why there's literally a cult around Trump, and that's why they're not really interested in anything that you have to say that's factual about how he may or may not be guilty. That's not the point.
Yeah, well...
The point is how I feel.
Yes, and I feel that you're the ones that are guilty.
F your feelings, but not mine.
Right. Well, that's Gimmitarianism for you. That's the way we've always described it. And again, that comes up a lot. A lot of people have that thought.
This is the Jonah Goldberg piece again.
Yes.
One of the many, many reasons I like this particular piece is, of course, it has a Princess Bride reference in it.
All right.
And he says, let's talk about our regime, a term these people use with Vizzini-like confidence and error. In 2004, a lot of angry Democrats loved the phrase regime change starts at home. The idea was voting W out of office would constitute regime change. The stupidity of this talking point begins with the fact that elections are how our regime works. It's a system of government, not an administration run by elected Democrats or Republicans. So America's regime isn't on any ballot. It is the ballot, which, by the way, is why election interference from the people like who the Republicans nominated in Arizona is such a serious thing.
Okay.
So Jonah will go on and say, that's our regime. I love it regardless of who the president is, which brings us to the search at Mar-a-Lago. Like all the people bleating out about the Biden regime, I have no idea if searching the former president's home was a wise decision, but from every account, it was a Lost Bowl decision. Dictators do not typically seek warrants from judges when they send police to search the homes of their political opponents. And if the reporting is to be believed, the White House didn't even know it happened. So if J. Edgar Hoover's stewardship of the FBI didn't indict the legitimacy of the regime, I don't see how this could, because government screw-ups happen all the time. So even if that's what it was. So by all means, folks, vote Biden out of office if you want. I don't think he's up to the job. But what I can't get my head around is the idea that the solution to our allegedly bananifying regime is to put the Browning mealy giant banana back in power.
Well, I think I would agree with that.
So, I agree with most of it. Okay, so he doesn't like Biden and he doesn't like the policies. But he confirms that that's the way the system works. And if the guy's elected, then that's what happens. And he also points out dictators don't ask a judge for permission to do squat. They do it. Then they find a judge who agrees with them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they'll ask as cover.
They do it the other way around.
But sometimes they'll ask so that it looks like they aren't dictators, but they ask in ways like, wouldn't it, nice family you got there, be ashamed something happened to them if you didn't rule correctly. Right. So. That's true. And there's a lot of reporters kind of coming to that and commentators coming to that conclusion, which is good and none too soon. In fact, several years too late. But you got to see if they learned anything from the Mueller report or the coverage of Trump. Mueller? It isn't all about him. And you certainly can't just take what his lackeys and minions and mooks say and say, I have a story because X said it wasn't true. Therefore, I'm balanced. Yeah. You can't. You shouldn't.
Right. It's lawful to go in there. Well, Trump's side says it isn't lawful. Therefore, we have both sides. No. Yeah. It's lawful or it's not.
Right. Well, and it is.
And it is. And so say so. And so don't give any credence to that.
Did you see?
Or unless you said Trump falsely claims it wasn't lawful. I mean, that you can put in the story.
Well, we'll see how they handle it. The New York Times reporting on it today, I think, might do some of that work. A rare occasion that the headline indicates that maybe they did head in that direction and that we might be satisfied by it on a New York Times piece from Peter Baker. This is a rare thing. We should acknowledge it. I don't know who wrote the headline, but it seems to hint at exactly that. The headline being, Trump claims he's a victim of tactics he once deployed. Donald J. Trump's efforts to politicize the law enforcement system have now become his shield as he tries to deflect accusations of wrongdoing. In other words, brief reminder to people who are too thick-headed to get it and are very much invested in not getting it, but for the rest of us, we can observe Donald Trump wanted the federal law enforcement apparatus to work in exactly the way he now accuses it of working, and he tried mightily to have it work that way, and he figured... And that was probably because he always believed that it worked that way for every president, but it really didn't. And Donald Trump is just an ignoramus. But then when he became the president, he figured, okay, now I can have the same personal loyalty from all federal law enforcement, and all of my enemies will go down as criminals because I'll order that to be the case. And it really never worked because that wasn't the way the system worked, and he never really took that much control of everything. But now that he's being targeted by legitimate law enforcement, he figures, Biden must have gotten to the bottom of this and have been able to manipulate law enforcement in ways that I was never able to. Darn it. But, yeah, I thought it was a pretty good point. Remember, when you were president, you wanted this to happen. And you know why it was a bad idea? We all said it was fascism. It's interesting that then when you become the quote-unquote victim or the target of law enforcement, you figure, this must be fascism. After all, they're just doing this to get me, as opposed to, this is how the law enforcement community works. When people commit crimes, they catch them and take away the stuff.
Well, I will remind you of two versions of something Upton Sinclair said a century ago, literally a century ago.
I think I...
First version, the one that people are most familiar with, it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. Yeah. So there are certain people in this world, whether it's the Hugh Hewitts or the Byron Yorks of the world, Brit Humes, whose job it is to be stupid. It's their job. Right. You get that. The other version of that is never argue with a man whose job depends on not being convinced. So that's why it's useless to get involved with trolls.
Yes, I think that's.
Literally, their job depends upon not being convinced. So it's not a good faith argument. When you come across that, that's fine. What's bothersome is when you think people like the Peter Bakers of the world are in that situation, not the Byron Yorks. That what is it about this that makes you not understand that Biden is right? It's autocracy versus, liberal democracy. And you better damn pick a side.
I hope that he has. I've only read the headline, so I'm not quite sure.
Right. So, headlines aside, stories never really reflect that. It's always, this is what Ivanka said. So that's sort of
friends say she said it.
Anyway. Yeah, but, there's that. So how is all of this playing? This in itself isn't going to move the needle. The bigger picture will, of course. Most people, and you're allowed to say that when it's more than 50%, even if it's 51, 57%, 56 in most of the polls,
bipartisan.
That people think that Trump should be held accountable and, face charges for what happened on January 6th.
Well,
so
good.
Go ahead, do it. It's not necessarily related to the Mar-a-Lago raid, but anything he did that's illegal should be in the same category.
Yes.
And how is that playing with the public? Well, a couple of things are all coalescing. Of course, we had that list I read you of Biden's accomplishments. We have, of course, the post-Roe, post-Dobbs situation. This is an Axios with our friend Josh Kraushaar, who's moved there from National Journal. What's happening in the Minnesota 1st District special election on Tuesday? Republican Brad Finstad, I alluded to this yesterday, only defeated Democrat Jeff Ettinger by 4 points in a district that Trump carried by 10. Finstad's winning margin was only slightly wider than the late GOP Representative Jim Hagedorn's 3-point victory in 2020. In Washington 8, the suburban Seattle swing seat in which candidates from all parties are on the same primary ballot, Democrats won 49-6. And Republicans tallied 49-2. Kim Schreier won the seat by 4 points in 2020. This is a bellwether contest that Republicans should be winning decisively, and they're not. In Washington Senate race, Patty Murray won 52. Republicans tallied 41. The results show Republicans are making inroads, but not nearly enough to unseat the veteran senator in a solid blue state. Why this matters? The results suggest Republicans are still well on track to win the House, but not by the historic margins that once looked possible. That's why places like the Cook Report and others, Kyle Kondik, Crystal Ball, wherever you look, have changed the ratings. People like Dave Wasserman, instead of thinking Republicans are going to win 30 seats, and of course they always give a range, it's going to be more like 15, or maybe even less.
Well, that's good.
And it's moving in the right direction. And they also indicate that
any.
Republicans can't rely on big red waves to sweep in their flawed Senate nominees. And that's why 538 says, 60% chance Democrats will keep the Senate. So that's a slight advantage. What's next? Keep a close eye on August 23rd special election in New York's 19th district. Both parties are spending aggressively for a narrative-shaping win in a district Biden carried by 2 points. And it's a test of both parties' dominant midterm messages. Democrats are running ads on abortion. Republicans are focused on inflation and crime because Republicans are always focused on inflation and crime. This is from the Washington Post. Post-Roe special elections show potentially encouraging signs for Democrats. The result, Minnesota's 1st congressional district, caught the party strategists' attention and nonpartisan analysts looking for clues about the mood of the electorate. That's why they're looking for clues, because they really don't know what's going to happen.
Go to a diner, I guess.
They just don't know. And so that really bothers pundits. Of course, some of them it bothers more than others because, like in the case of like Cook and Wasserman, it's their job to know these things.
Yeah.
So sometimes in advance you do know, and sometimes it's like a little foggy, and they hate that. They want a little more clarity. But this is just such a bizarre situation. You have Biden's approval ratings getting better, but still he's not terribly popular. And Rasmussen, he's up to 45. That doesn't mean a real pollster would find that, but they are improving. How much time do you have to improve before the election? Not that much time. And at the same time, as they like to put it, we're confounded in flummoxed because the Democrats are running ahead of Biden's approval rating. Of course, Biden isn't on the ballot, and Republicans are running terrible candidates. So we also have post-Roe, post-Dobbs. There's so much going on here that, it's not a normal year. And so saying, but in this year and this year and this year this happened. Well, when did, post-Roe, post-Dobbs happen? When did the Ukraine war happen?
That too.
What year? Remind me, because this is different. And so why don't you just admit you don't really know and watch it with the rest of us?
Well, then you won't subscribe to their Substack.
Yeah, exactly. Here's an opinion, Jennifer Rubin, writing in the Washington Post, same theme. Pelosi's found the Democrats' midterm strategy.
Okay.
She did this during an interview with MSNBC's
Mar-A-Lago.
Morning Joe on Tuesday, which I watched. She spoke at multiple legislative wins that fall in the category, like CHIPS and the Science Act that President Biden signed into law, the PACT Act, which will expand health care for sick veterans, the Inflation Reduction Act. It's pretty exciting, she said. It has an integrity to it, and it's about meeting the needs of America's working families for the people, not politics. And then she was once again on message. CHIPS and Science Act will lower kitchen table costs and create good-paying jobs for America's family. Same with infrastructure. And above all, she tells her members Democrats should run on what they've done. And the point is, thanks to Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, they've done stuff.
Oh.
Now, they don't have to, as you're running, thank them. But the fact of the matter is, Sinema and Manchin contributed to that.
Yeah, they did. And, I mean, maybe it would be a good idea to do that. Maybe that would make them
Well, if you're a
feel
centrist
good
or
and
if you're running in a
happy
swing district, you would.
Yeah. Right, true. Or you're trying to get a little extra something legislatively before things close, before the door closes, and say some nice things about those two. They feel good, vote yes, you get another thing.
Right. Let's look at one of our favorite districts, which is Virginia, too. One of our favorite states, one of our favorite districts. Since the Supreme Court overruled federal protection of abortion rights, she and scores of Democrats have elevated the issue to the top of their agenda. Elaine Lauria's abortion ads now figure heavily, whereas Kim Schreier Washington's been running a similar ad. Even in red states like Kansas and Nebraska, Democrats are leaning into the cultural issues. They've discovered that talking about reproductive rights works when facing a party seeking absolute bans across the country. And ironically, Democratic candidates need not do much on their third issue, Republicans' lawlessness, because Republicans basically either do it by themselves or, DOJ is doing it for them.
All right. Yeah. Well, good. I don't mind seeing. I think people have been hoping for a while that Democrats would lean in their own way into their own version of the culture war, since it seems to be very popular with certain American voters. Maybe it could be just as popular from the opposite direction and heading in the opposite direction. So give it a try, I guess.
If Democrats are lucky, Trump will declare his candidacy for 2024 and scare the living daylights out of the majority of the electorate that fears his return to office. So altogether, Democrats are ready to go on the offensive. They can tap their legislative wins and promise to fight for abortion rights, and they can do so while reminding voters the GOP can't be trusted.
And reminder that over on the Republican side, they view the warrant and seizure at Mar-a-Lago as making it more likely and smarter for Donald Trump to declare earlier, and it will totally make him a lock, and they just handed him the election, so they're talking with their usual level of confidence. But yeah, so Democrats are of the belief, hey, maybe we would get a break out of, what if Trump does this dumb thing and declares for president super early and scares everybody, and it's reflected at the polls, and Republicans are running around saying, what if he does this super smart thing of declaring early and, lets everybody know that he's going to save America and that the FBI are terrorists? For the 3 people out of 100 that works for, I guess they'll be enthused, but they were never they were never of much consequence. The rest of the country apparently would take that as an alarm. So okay.
Our friend, listener, Bosengood points out, regime change in 2004 was a parody of Bush rhetoric about Iraq, which Goldberg, the author of Liberal Fascism, apparently didn't get. But as I said, there's no sense of humor on the right, so it's not surprising.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't even occur to me that Jonah Goldberg didn't know what that really was, but I guess so. Or anybody that didn't quite understand it. But yeah, a good reminder, and it too. Also, if you thought, oh well, he's sort of making some sense. Yeah, remember that he was the first guy to publish a widely recognized item about how the real fascists were the liberals, and everyone knows it. And the first one to try and even slip by didn't you see National Socialism? See, I told you. I mean, Jonah Goldberg has at some point in the not too distant past been the leading tip of the stupidity spear.
Well, I quoted Upton Sinclair. Now I'll do Felix Frankfurter. Wisdom too often never comes, and so one ought not to reject it merely because it comes late.
Okay. I mean, maybe. But, look, he's been...
And Ben Franklin said a bunch of stuff, which is really cute. It has nothing to do with anything, but I was
right.
Great.
Something about we like beer, and God gave it to us. So terrific.
Yeah, exactly right. So, anyway, that's it for today.
All right.
Go find your own sayings.
Sure. Also one of my favorites about Franklin, I guess when he was asked about why they had impeachment in the Constitution, was that he said, well, if you don't have a way of, essentially, if you don't have a way of removing someone that corrupt from office peacefully and according to some, directions and the rule of law, then you'll kill him. And that's bad and leads to bad things. Assassination is apparently the only recourse against the tyrant unless you do it by the rule of law. So, maybe the rule of law is kind of important.
Right.
He's quite a guy, Ben Franklin. And, hey, how about that kite with the key on it? Holy moly. What a guy. Seems dangerous, really.
So, here are the little fun things that are now coming out as people get back to business and start talking about things like, oh, this came out at the trial of the January 6th guy. Oh, this other thing came out at the trial of the January 6th guy. So the first one I saw was people who thought they were at the White House and not the Capitol. But this one is a Capitol rioter claimed he was elsewhere on January 6th handing out Bibles, but the problem for him is he was a convicted burglar on probation, was wearing GPS monitoring.
Oh, so at least we know where he is.
The insurrection.
Here, take this with you.
Right, yes. Or as my friend Maggie Jordan writes, the truth is these are not very bright guys and things got out of hand.
Yeah.
You'll recognize that quote.
Well, right. Well, that's certainly true. And I have heard that before, and I've seen video clips before where the people are inside the Capitol shouting about how they're at the White House. And
not only that, they're not only in the Capitol shouting that they're at the White House, they're wearing their work parkas.
Oh, yes, right.
With where they work,
right,
emblazoned on it on the video, making it fairly easy to track them down.
Yes, and sometimes they were owners of their own businesses, so you're wearing, the Jones Contracting Wichita, Kansas thing on the back of your jacket.
Honest John's used car dealership,
right.
parka.
Had they known, they all could have named their businesses Four Seasons, and then nobody would ever have found out which business they were really from. So
yeah, but Rudy would know.
Yeah, well, maybe.
By the way, Rudy didn't show up for his...
No?
Or he is going to be made to show up for his Georgia deposition, and Lindsey Graham didn't show up.
No, why didn't they go get him?
Well, that's the next.
He may have been. The Senate was in session, so that causes problems. You're going to collect somebody like that and drag them to Georgia if the Senate's in session. Could be an issue, but Rudy Giuliani has nothing else to be doing. So, all right. Well, have you got something on that? I'd like to read.
On which one?
On the two of them, either of them not showing up.
Well, yeah, the last thing I sent you.
Okay, good.
Very, very.
I'm on a different page now, so all right. There it is. I'll take a look. It's something maybe on background, but thank you, Greg. And it's Thursday already. How did that happen? That means we won't get to speak to you again until Monday. A great tragedy, and maybe some raids will happen in between now and then. Surely they'll do something terrible for us to talk about. All right. Well, we'll look forward to it. Not the terrible things that happen, but rather the talking.
Right.
Okay.
So I think I'm hungry. I'm going to go have a banana. I will see you. Talk to you on Monday.
Yes. Great. Thanks for coming by. This is a good collection. So a good way for us to start. We are not quite at the break here, but we can roll right up to it. And I can. It might be a good time to
hear that bingy sound.
Yeah. Oh, well, that would be fine. Or however you want to handle it. But maybe now is the time we can return. I'll figure out in the first couple minutes before, there's the dinghy, whether or not Peter Baker followed up that great headline. Let's get a taste of that in a minute or so before the music has to come on. Remember the headline? Trump claims he's a victim of tactics he once deployed. Donald J. Trump's efforts to politicize the law enforcement system have now become his shield as he tries to deflect accusations of wrongdoing. I'm trying to think of... did he just, when he tweeted it, he tweeted something kind of intriguing, but maybe it was just that combination of the headline and subheader, but I feel like there was something else. Yes. His commentary then on the piece was, for 4 years in power, Trump tried to turn the nation's law enforcement apparatus into an instrument of political power to carry out his wishes. Now he accuses it of being exactly what he tried to turn it into, a political weapon, just not for him. Well, if nothing else gets said in the piece, that's pretty good and enough of a takeaway for me. But let's see what he says long form. 2 days after the 2020 election that Donald J. Trump refused to admit he lost, his oldest son, Donald Trump Jr., made an urgent recommendation: fire Wray. The younger Mr. Trump did not explain in the text why it was necessary to oust Christopher A. Wray, the FBI director his father himself had appointed more than 3 years earlier. He did not have to. Everyone understood. Mr. Wray, in the view of the Trump family and its followers, was not personally loyal enough to the departing president. Throughout his 4 years in the White House, Mr. Trump tried to turn the nation's law enforcement apparatus into an instrument of political power to carry out his wishes. Now, as the FBI, under Mr. Wray, has executed an unprecedented search warrant at the former president's Florida home, Mr. Trump is accusing the nation's justice system of being exactly what he tried to turn it into, a political weapon for a president, just not for him. I think that adds a little more context to it, just a little bit more, and it was well worth doing. There is, in fact, no evidence that President Biden has had any role in the investigation. Mr. Biden has not publicly demanded that the Justice Department lock Mr. Trump up the way Mr. Trump publicly demanded that the Justice Department lock up Mr. Biden and other Democrats, nor has anyone knowledgeably contradicted the White House statement that it was not even informed about the search at Mar-A-Lago beforehand, much less involved in ordering it. So, long way to go. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue on with the reading of Peter Baker's piece. I have a feeling might be some more to it that we will enjoy hearing. Where he left off with his reminder that, oh yeah, by the way, everything that Trump said about Biden being in control of things and sending the personal weapon of the politicized Justice Department against him is without merit and without basis, though he doesn't just come right out and say it's a huge lie, but, he's doing it in florid language. Right. So not only has that not been the case, but no one has been able to contradict the White House statement that it was not even informed about this search, and that certainly he did nothing to order it. But Mr. Trump, of course, has a long history of accusing adversaries, or I was going to say adversaries again, and I know that drives everybody crazy, but accusing adversaries of doing what he himself does or would do in the same situation, which is New York Times-ese for every Republican accusation is a confession. That's our shorthand for it. His efforts to politicize the law enforcement system have now become his shield, not a very good one at that, but that's what he's using it for, a shield to try to deflect accusations of wrongdoing. Just as he asserted on Monday that the FBI search was political persecution, he made the same claim on Wednesday about the New York Attorney General's unrelated investigation of his business practices, as he invoked his Fifth Amendment right to avoid testifying because his answers could incriminate him. Now, flip the script and falsely claim that he is the victim of the exact same tactics that he once deployed. To do that is just the rankest hypocrisy, said Norman L. Eisen, though I screwed up the order of things there, but that's the gist of what he said, and there's a legitimate quote in the paper and everything. Norm Eisen, who served as special counsel to the House Judiciary Committee during the first Trump impeachment. But consistency, logic, evidence, truth, those are always the first to go by the board when a democracy comes under assault from within. Mr. Trump's Republican allies argue that he was not the one who undercut the apolitical tradition of the FBI and law enforcement, or at least he was not the first to do so. Instead, they maintain the system was corrupted by the Bureau's leadership and even members of the Obama administration when Mr. Trump and his campaign were investigated for possible collusion with Russia, which he was doing, during the 2016 campaign, an inquiry that ended with no charges of conspiracy with Moscow. Where is Robert Mueller at this point? I'd like to ask him a few questions. He's a former FBI director. Why isn't it relevant to get his comment? I guess he's just not answering. The former president's camp has long pointed to text messages between a pair of FBI officials that sharply criticized Mr. Trump, which he deserved because he was a criminal, during that campaign, and to surveillance warrants obtained against an advisor to Mr. Trump that were later deemed unjustified. The Justice Department acknowledged the warrants were flawed, and an inspector general faulted the FBI officials for their texts, but the Inspector General found nothing to conclude that anyone had tried to harm Mr. Trump out of political bias. In a letter to Mr. Wray on Wednesday, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, the top Republican in the Senate Intelligence Committee, alluded to the history of the FBI's previous investigation of Mr. Trump to cast doubt on the current inquiry that led to Monday's search for classified documents that the former president may have improperly taken when he left office. Not that they had anything to do with one another, but okay. The FBI's actions less than 3 months from the upcoming elections, everyone trying to obscure the actual rule there. Remember, as we discussed yesterday, to the extent that there is a rule about DOJ activity and proximity to elections, that rule is at 60 days and not 90 and not 3 months from an upcoming election. There's always an upcoming election, guys. Anyway, the FBI's actions less than 3 months from the upcoming elections are doing more to erode public trust in our government institutions, the electoral process, and the rule of law in the U.S. than the Russian Federation or any other foreign adversary, I'd love to say, Mr. Rubio said in the letter, even though it was inapposite because 3 months doesn't have anything to do with anything. And you're just saying that basically there can't be any law enforcement against Republicans because they're always involved in elections. That's not going to fly. The search was approved by a magistrate judge and high-level law enforcement officials required to meet a high level of proof of possible crimes. Attorney General Merrick Garland, himself a former appeals court judge who was appointed by Mr. Biden with bipartisan support and whose caution in pursuing the former president until now had generated criticism from liberals, has offered no public explanation so far. The degree to which Mr. Trump has succeeded in promoting his view of a politicized law enforcement system was evident in the hours after the FBI search on Monday, when many Republicans, including Representative Kevin McCarthy of California, the House Minority Leader, wasted little time in assailing the Bureau's action as partisan without waiting to find out what it was based on or what it turned up. So, there's a pretty good chance you end up with your foot you find after a certain amount of time and the camera pulls back far enough, where exactly was your foot when you said that? And what was it inserted in? And only with a larger picture can we tell exactly where it was. Even Republicans who've been critical of the former president in the past felt compelled to challenge the validity of the search. Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, Minority Leader who excoriated Trump for his role in the January 6th attack on Congress, waited 24 hours but finally spoke out on Tuesday to question whether something untoward had happened. The country deserves a thorough and immediate explanation of what led to the events of Monday, he said in a statement. Attorney General Garland and the Department of Justice should already have provided answers to the American people and must do so immediately, though they really don't. There's no must about it. They might, and you might think it's politically expedient for them to do so, but there's no must about it. Some law enforcement veterans, though, said Trump simply projects his own views onto others. Trump may actually believe that Merrick Garland is serving a political agenda because he has trouble processing anything else, said Michael Bromwich, a former Justice Department Inspector General. Trump simply doesn't understand people like Garland and the top leadership of DOJ and the FBI because their values are so alien to him. The FBI has a history at the intersection of politics and investigations. Under J. Edgar Hoover, its longtime director, the Bureau bugged and pursued domestic opponents of the federal government, at times serving as a political tool of various presidents of both parties. But with revelations of past abuses after Hoover's death in 1972, Congress and the FBI sought to cast off the Bureau's history and transform it into a more professional, politically neutral organization. FBI directors were appointed to 10-year terms to make them less subject to presidential whims. A new Office of Professional Responsibility was established. The House and Senate set up intelligence oversight committees, and other reforms were enacted to remove the Bureau from politics. Along the way, the Bureau earned the respect of both parties and many Americans in the last half-century. But now, of course, fire Ray, and let's do away with all of that stuff and politicize it again, right? Great strategy. That built-up store of public credibility has eroded significantly in the Trump years. The proportion of Americans who told Gallup pollsters that they thought the FBI was doing a good job fell from 57% in 2019 to 44% in 2021. And while public approval of the Bureau has long been bipartisan, views have now diverged along party lines. In Mr. Trump's first year in office, as he attacked the FBI over the Russia investigation, the share of Republicans who had a favorable view of the Bureau fell to 49% from 65% in surveys by the Pew Research Center, while remaining steady among Democrats at 77%. Trump upset the post-1970s status quo when he became president, tipping off balance over 40 years of an imperfect, though laudable, DOJ and FBI constructed culture of apolitical independence, said Douglas Charles, a historian of the FBI at Penn State and the author or editor of several books on the Bureau. It seems to me Trump has really put that culture and the FBI itself to the test to expose the weaknesses and limitations of the post-1970s system. Mr. Trump's view of the law enforcement system has been shaped by his own encounters with it, starting as a young developer in New York when the Justice Department sued his family company in 1973, accusing it of racial discrimination, and winning, by the way. Eventually, the Trump firm settled and agreed to change its policies, leaving a bitter taste in Mr. Trump's mouth. That taste was racism and guilt. That is to say, legal type of guilt. He doesn't understand the moral type. But by the time he ran for office, Mr. Trump viewed the justice system through a political lens. He led rally crowds in lock her up chants as he suggested he would imprison his opponent, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who was investigated but not prosecuted for improper handling of classified information, much as he is now suspected of doing. After winning, Mr. Trump saw law enforcement agencies as another institution to bend to his will, firing the FBI director, James Comey, when he declined to pledge personal loyalty to the president or publicly declare that Trump was not a target of the Russia inquiry. The president later fired Attorney General Jeff Sessions for recusing himself from that investigation and therefore not protecting Mr. Trump from it. During his time in office, Trump repeatedly called on the Justice Department and the FBI to investigate his foes and let off his friends. He publicly criticized the prosecutions of campaign advisors like Paul Manafort and Roger Stone and his former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, the notorious spy, eventually pardoning them, all of them, yes. He complained when 2 Republican congressmen were charged shortly before the 2018 midterm elections because it could cost the party seats. Yeah, their criminality could have cost the party seats. Frustrated with Mr. Wray, Mr. Trump sought to install a more supportive director of the FBI in 2020, backing down after protests by Attorney General William Barr. By that fall, as the president trailed in the polls for re-election, he pushed for the prosecution of Biden's son Hunter and lashed out at Mr. Barr and Mr. Wray for not prosecuting Democrats like the elder Mr. Biden and Barack Obama, because why not? Because of the Russia inquiry. Those people should be indicted, Mr. Trump said. This was the greatest political crime in the history of our country, and that includes Obama, and it includes Biden, neither of whom ever had their homes raided. After losing his bid for a second term, Mr. Trump ultimately disregarded his son's advice, as he disregards most of his children, and did not fire Mr. Wray, but in his final weeks in office pushed the Justice Department to help him overturn the election. Mr. Barr rebuffed Mr. Trump and publicly rejected the false election claims before resigning. Fat a lot of good that did, but that's what happened. Trump repeatedly pressed Barr's successor, Jeffrey Rosen, to go along with his scheme to discredit the election results and came close to firing him when he would not and installing an ally who would, Jeffrey Clark. The president was blocked only when told that every senior Justice Department official would resign in protest. That was his last chance to influence law enforcement from the inside, at least for now. So from the outside, he rails against what he calls the injustice of a law enforcement agency run by his own appointee. Not bad, really, given that it's Peter Baker and we very frequently have criticisms to offer of particularly what shows up in the body of his reporting. But okay, let's see. Other things to add to the broader picture here. There are many. Of course, the Times also reporting with almost the same photo, I guess the same series of photos used to illustrate both, but reporting on his appearance for a deposition in New York. And, well, everyone knows what happened. He invoked the Fifth Amendment on everything but stating his name for the record. He literally refused to answer any of the questions put to him. Trump invokes Fifth Amendment, attacking legal system as troubles mount. Why does the legal system keep coming for me? All the way from 1973 to date, they've constantly been saying I'm doing something wrong. It must be all the corruption in the departments and not me. It couldn't possibly be me. So, all right, we have the fact that he invoked the Fifth Amendment. I don't think that there is much in here that we don't already know, but I'll note it for the record and note also that they note for the record that, yes, Trump has been on the record before saying that only criminals invoke the Fifth Amendment, and if you're innocent, why wouldn't you want the opportunity to explain yourself? And it is kind of interesting, except, the only thing of interest in here is that he offers comment afterwards. Mr. Trump's only detailed comment, people with knowledge of the proceedings said, was an all-out attack on the Attorney General of New York and her inquiry, which he called a continuation of, quote, the greatest witch hunt in the history of our country. But this is the somewhat interesting part. I once asked, if you're innocent, why are you taking the Fifth Amendment? He said, while reading from a prepared statement, which overlapped significantly with the one he had released to the public. Doesn't have much capacity for more than that. I now know the answer to that question. So I think that's really the interesting part of it, is that for years he would demagogue on, why would you take the Fifth Amendment? Why would you? Doesn't that mean you're guilty? It all knows we mean that even you know that you're guilty. We all know this. Why would you use the Fifth Amendment if you're innocent? Well, lo and behold, he now has the answer. He couldn't divine it intellectually at any point, which is a real simple exercise. And if you don't get it, most teachers in civics will tell you, well, why would you use the Fifth Amendment if you thought you weren't guilty? And the answer is, well, sometimes you can say things that when examined under the cold, hard light of a courtroom or parsed by attorneys charged with the task of making you look indictable or convictable to a jury, sometimes you're going to wish you hadn't said things in exactly the form you did. Even though you offered it as proof of your innocence, it gets used differently. So really the best thing to do, unfortunately, in a situation like that, is to keep your thoughts to yourself, keep your mouth shut, and let your lawyers do the talking for you in court. But, of course, he's only just figured that out now. That's pretty amazing. And for a guy who's been involved in the legal system for so much of his adult life, you would think he knew the answer. And in fact, it's even worse, because he did know the answer. He was just demagoguing on whoever was in the dock at the time and taking the Fifth Amendment, but that he didn't like. And it's a sad commentary, to say the least. All right, let's see. Other things to add to the pictures. This was an interesting thing. For the... Let's see. For one of the small bore issues of the Mar-A-Lago situation, I did grab up a little bit of background. I mentioned yesterday, and for the last couple of days, that how shall we put it? Oh, right. So that the search being conducted on Mar-A-Lago and it being called Donald Trump's residence or winter residence or whatever, and then bringing up the point that, he's been at war with Palm Beach the whole time, the municipality there, because so much of what he's done to Mar-a-Lago in turning it into a private club, a money-making operation, which, nothing in particular wrong with that necessarily, but Palm Beach being the hoity-toity place it is, and all the neighboring homes equal in, grandiosity and stature in many cases to Mar-a-Lago, or at least what it was in its heyday. I don't know what it's been turned into now necessarily. Spray-painted gold, essentially. But those people are interested in maintaining their hoity-toityness, and they didn't like the idea that this enormous monstrosity could be built up as I don't think they had any particular objection necessarily at this stage of the game to there being a club there, though I'm sure they fought it initially. But the idea that he could build a place like that and claim it as his home as well, even though also claiming all the tax breaks that go with it being a business, et cetera, et cetera. And at any rate, the municipality always insisted that no, you can't actually claim it as a residence. Well, I guess, he's doing it anyway. So I guess the question was just what exactly is going on here and what's the legal status of Mar-a-Lago. The Palm Beach Daily News, I guess, ventured to answer that question around this time last year, early May, so a little earlier, in 2021. The town attorney's final word: Trump can live at Mar-a-Lago. They just weren't going to be able to stop him. The Secret Service would block you from trying to evict him. What were you really going to do? So a municipal government probably powerless to do very much about it when the person, living there is like, I don't give a damn what anybody thinks of me. I have no shame. So what did they come to? This conclusion. Town attorney's final word: Trump can live at Mar-a-Lago as a bona fide employee. This is an interesting settlement here. Some of the former president's neighbors had hoped to block him from living at Mar-a-Lago, citing a 1993 declaration of use agreement that he signed with the town, and then went back on because I don't like the way that came out, and it's unfair, and I'm very popular, and everybody should give me what I want. Jody Wagner, reporting for the Palm Beach Daily Post, again, May 7th of 2021, says, when former President Donald Trump heads to his New Jersey golf club for the summer, he will leave his Palm Beach home with the legal right to live there. Turning aside arguments from neighbors who claim that Trump is not permitted to live at Mar-a-Lago based on a declaration of use agreement he signed with the town in 1993, Palm Beach town attorney John Randolph concluded that the agreement doesn't specifically prohibit the ex-president from residing at the club. How do you like that? Town manager Kirk Blouin, I guess Blouin, told the Daily News this week. How so? Well, here. The 1993 agreement allowed Trump to convert the private residence into a private club, right? Randolph also advised that under the town's zoning code, private clubs can provide living quarters to a bona fide employee. These are usually the people that he imports from Eastern Europe for a season or two to be waiters and waitresses at the club. But he could claim that he's a bona fide employee of the club, and that's why he's living there. Wow, that's pretty amazing. Under evidence provided to the town, Trump is a bona fide employee of Mar-a-Lago, Randolph concluded. The town defines employee as any person generally working on site for the establishment and includes sole proprietors, partners, limited partners, corporate officers, and the like. Trump's duties at Mar-a-Lago, such as they may be, according to his attorney, John B. Marion, include overseeing the property, evaluating the performance of employees, suggesting improvements in the club's operations — he probably does do these things — reviewing the club's financials — maybe, maybe not — attending events — sure — greeting guests, and recommending candidates for membership. So he probably does do those things. I don't know if any of them are necessary, but he probably does do them. By the way, if John B. Marion is the attorney for Trump with responsibility for overseeing the property, I'm just curious why we saw what was the name of the weirdo? Christina Bobb, who showed up as the attorney for of record, I guess, when the search was being executed. But John Marion, who apparently deals with the actual property issues there, was, I guess, nowhere to be found. By the way, Christina Bobb, in case we were wondering, I did see somebody do a thing, who is Christina Bobb piece the other day. She is, of greatest relevance here, I think, a former One America News, OAN network, anchor, but is an actual attorney as well. But I thought that was maybe the most relevant piece of background on her. So a lunatic is essentially what we're talking about. But anyway, so back to the mundane issue of whether or not Trump is an employee of Mar-a-Lago. The town council hosted an informational session during its February meeting, that would be in 2021, in which Randolph, Marion, and two attorneys representing Trump's neighbors shared their views on the matter. No action was taken at the meeting, but in subsequent discussions with Randolph, council members did not object to his legal findings or to the evidence that Trump is an employee of the club. Bluen said, "There is no action for the town of Palm Beach to take at this time," he said. So, that's pretty much it. But guess what? There's more words. Neighbors and others who wanted the town to block Trump from living at his Palm Beach club had used the 1993 agreement as a clear argument for why he couldn't reside there. You mean just because there was writing signed by both that said you can't live here? That's all. That's the thin reed to which you're clutching? Well, apparently. West Palm Beach lawyer Reginald Stambaugh, who represents Trump's neighbors, tried to convince the council in December that Trump's living at Mar-a-Lago would violate that agreement, as well as pose security concerns and devalue surrounding properties. It does do that. Trump, who has been living at his Palm Beach club since leaving the White House on January 20th, is expected to head to Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, New Jersey to spend the summer, according to multiple media reports. That would have been your chance to bulldoze the place, but you didn't take it. There's a Rand Paul neighbors type solution to this issue, if you ask me. The former president has been a regular summer visitor to the club since the mid-2000s, and this summer will mark his first as ex-president. He's expected to head there sometime after Mar-a-Lago hosts its final brunch of the social season on Sunday, which marks Mother's Day. It's such a frilly, froofy, weird thing for him to do. Anyway, following that event, the club will close its main house for the summer with plans to reopen in the fall. In the letter to members, Mar-a-Lago said it will keep its beach club open through July 4th, while spa services in the gym will be available through May 30th. Tennis and croquet play will continue through May 31st. That's interesting. So you can go to the gym on the 30th and play croquet. But the gym on the 31st? No. Croquet? Yes. How much croquet is being played? Who cares? But the fact that it's being played at all is quite probably would ordinarily, if you've told Trump supporters that croquet was being played at Biden's house, they would be furious and say something about his pronouns, most likely. I don't know why, but they probably would. Anyway, I thought that was somewhat interesting, if not the cutting edge of the news. But why don't we return to that? Because there's a lot to share. Of course, the answer to why won't we return to it is that the break is coming up. But there's plenty to go on here, many different directions to take, and some state-level stories that I think are worth sharing as well. Which break are we on here? Yes, the third, the 2-minute break. Okay, so let's see. Before we move on to that, lots of whispers about informers as well at Mar-A-Lago, as Greg alluded to. And in case you didn't see, something I made brief mention of, what's it? The Lincoln, what do they call themselves? I keep saying the Lincoln Memorial is all I can remember. Is the Lincoln Project? Was that it? You know who I'm talking about. The Republicans who are anti-Trump and who you probably shouldn't be giving any money to because, they got enough money as it is. But they put out one of the better ads I've seen them do, even though it's a 1-minute ad, so it's not airing on TV anywhere. But pretty good one that really was designed to get under Trump's skin if he sees it. And he's got a lot of skin to get under, too. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. Let's see. I see Armando was spending some time talking about this idea of Trump as employee and pointing that out to who knows who at the last count. But okay, I think we got it covered there. Where was I with? Oh, yes, right. I was going to tell you about the Lincoln Memorial Project group thing. The Lincoln Project is responsible for the contents of this ad, and it's actually a pretty good one. And very rarely, it's fairly frequent now that people hand things out on Twitter and say, look at this devastating ad. It really kills them, and I can't believe it, and share it with everybody. And very rarely am I glad I hit the play button at the end. I don't know if I'm glad necessarily, but I thought this was one of the better produced pieces, and most likely to possibly get under the skin, if not Trump, then of Trump supporters, and you'll see what I mean. They make excellent use of stage whispers here. It's kind of confusing, and maybe seeing it, you've probably already seen it, maybe seeing it helps sort things out with the audio. It could be sort of disjointed and weird sounding in audio, but they're showing various scenes in and around the search and the seizure, and alluding to other people in his inner circle possibly having been the ones to tip off law enforcement about this stuff. And they flash pictures of all the usual suspects, people you would think that it would infuriate him to think might have turned against him, including his own family members. But I love the use of stage whispers and innuendo, and the knowledge that Trump's ego and insecurities would possibly come into play, and maybe you could infuriate him into spilling the beans about something. Let me play you the audio and see if it makes any sense without I'll close my eyes to see whether it makes any sense without the video.
Who was it, Donald? Who gave you up to the feds? Who squealed? Who told them what you kept in a safe at Mar-A-Lago? No, not that stuff. Disgusting. The classified documents. 15 boxes of top-secret files. That's naughty, Donald. And illegal. You broke the law. No wonder the Department of Justice and the FBI came knocking. They're coming for you. But who leaked? Who sold you out? Was it Jared? Ungrateful. Ivanka? They're backing away from you. Don Jr.? Your own son. Eric? Do you even care? Melania? She wants to escape. Mark Meadows? Who did it? All your old Washington friends are talking to the 1-6 committee and the grand jury. They weren't your friends. Maybe it was someone closer. Who could it be? Someone you Trusted. Betrayed. Now you're the first president to have his home raided by the FBI.
This is your legacy.
It's bad, Donald.
Your father would be ashamed.
And there's no one you can trust.
No one.
No one at all.
There never was.
So I like the use of that stage whisper. As I said, oops, I got to make sure that doesn't roll again, but... And I left the microphone on so that I could chuckle and laugh along with it. In case you didn't grab, or I guess without the video you can't tell, but when they were saying that they did the raid and they were looking for documents and then said, no, not those. Then we're panning across the now infamous pictures of the torn up documents in the toilet, which of course they had to use the disgusting with, and that was probably an allusion. I mean, that particular choice of words, it's the right choice of words, but maybe an allusion back to Trump's own words when he was attacking Hillary Clinton during one of the debates when she went to she used one of the bathroom breaks for the intended purpose and went to the bathroom and saying, oh no, disgusting, too disgusting, and talking about all sorts of things. He's done it a number of times. Anyway, I thought that was well done, and needling him about which of his inner circle is not to be trusted. And I love that way that one concludes. All your friends are talking to the 1-6 committee. They never were your friends in the first place. It was really well done. So, great. I'm glad they spent their money on it. They won't be spending any of mine on it. And we give them the free publicity of playing it on the podcast, because really that's the only way that this thing is being distributed, is people saying, look at this on YouTube, or play this on your podcast. Nobody's spending the money to put a 1-minute ad on TV at this stage of the game in the middle of the summer. Maybe later, but by that point we'll probably have evidence of another crime. So they'll make another ad about that one. Still, well done. And like I said, I love the use of the stage whisper on that. And all the ASMR folks would be fun and entertained by the use of those whisperings. Okay, let's see. I'm in the wrong place. I'm in the wrong set of emails here. Back to Pocket and the things that I had to share now that we have more time post-break. Let's see. I mentioned that there were some local things going on that might be of some interest to you. Let me see if I can't share those with you. I saw Adam Bonin tweeting this story around from Lancaster Online with this commentary, as he puts it. So typical. Lancaster audit the vote PA state Senate candidate. So a state Senate candidate who's affiliated with Audit the Vote PA, and you know what that means, has, of course, lost by 20% at the polls at his primary. Nonetheless, has asked the county to have or let him inspect 22,000 plus mail-in ballots. Why, sure, why not? What could the harm be? Well, anyway, they spent weeks redacting private voter information from the envelopes so that he could make this inspection. But guess what? He's never gone back. He's never bothered going back to inspect them after they spent all that time and money setting the whole thing up, because he was never serious in the first place. It was just an excuse to try to claim that he won and that everybody should, get out of his way and let him take office, even though it was just a primary. So what does the actual write-up have to say? Let's see how long it is over at Lancaster Online. State Senate candidate submits exhaustive elections records request, but has yet to examine the results, writes Carter Walker for the paper. Mike Miller is the not at all made up name of the guy who did this. And that's according to the caption of the photo. Let's get to the body of the piece here. Got to scroll like 15 minutes to find the body of the piece. The losing candidate, and let me say that again, the losing candidate in Lancaster County Senate primary filed a records request to review every mail-in ballot envelope returned by voters for the May 17th election, a request that consumed weeks of staff time to fulfill. But we will let you do it. It is your right. Let's let's do it. But all he wanted to do was complain and cry and waste people's time and money. Taxpayer money at that. But he's not responsible or accountable for it because he's not a public official. So, the end. The request took staff several weeks to complete as they worked in rotation to not get burnt out as they redacted signatures, addresses, and voters' unique ID numbers from about 22,000 envelopes, said Krista Miller, the county's chief clerk of elections. The candidate, Mike Miller of Ephrata, have I got that pronunciation right or wrong, lost the GOP primary in the 36th Senate District to the incumbent, Senator Ryan Aument of West Hempfield. As of Tuesday, Mike Miller had not visited the county building to review the records he requested, according to Krista Miller, who is not related to the candidate. Miller. All right, I guess you got to say something. The redacted envelopes fill roughly 10 double-wide file boxes, which together take up half of one room in the elections office. Krista Miller asked that LNP/Lancaster Online not photograph the boxes to ensure that no voter information was accidentally revealed. The work was completed at the end of July, Krista Miller said. I guess you have to say Krista Miller because they're both named Miller, but okay. It's a little awkward. Anyway, the work was completed at the end of July, she said, adding that the only information that remains visible on the envelopes is the voter's name and the date the voter signed it, which really is too much to give this guy anyway. Now you don't have secret ballots anymore. Tammy Bender, the county's right-to-know officer, is currently out of the office. Her boss, county solicitor Jackie, Fursich, I don't know, Pfursich, said she does not know if Mike Miller reached out to Bender to schedule a time to review the files. Krista Miller, too, said she never heard from Bender before she left for vacation about Miller setting a time. When will it be Miller time, I guess, is the real question here. Mike Miller did not respond to an email seeking comment. In the past, he has refused to speak with Lancaster Online. Interesting. So then on to some more general reporting here, noting a national trend of some sort. Elections staff across the country have reported being served with multiple records requests from people who believe massive fraud was committed to elect Joe Biden president in 2020. They will never come pick that up, is my guess. I've seen it too many times before, said Tammy Patrick, a senior advisor to the elections program at Democracy Fund, a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit focused on improving the democratic process. Patrick said these types of time-consuming records requests have become a common tactic among election deniers. Earlier this month, the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing on threats facing election workers, in which several election directors from around the country testified they had been receiving similar requests. I've had people say they are working 9 to 5 fulfilling records requests and 5 to 9 preparing for the election, Patrick said. It's a challenge because the public relies on records requests, but it can be an incredibly labor-intensive process. She said elections officials, for the most part, want to be transparent, but there is such a concerted fighting attempt. That is, the election conspiracy believers, acting like they're going to find the body. Mike Miller was the lead volunteer and organizer of Audit the Vote PA canvass of Lancaster County addresses last August and September. The group claims that it found enough evidence of election anomalies to call into question Biden's victory, but a close examination of the canvass data showed significant flaws in the project. When Miller lost by a 20-point margin to Aument in the May primary, Audit the Vote PA spearheaded an effort on his behalf to initiate a hand recount of the race, though the effort was not successful. Asked for comment about Miller's request for 22,000 ballots, Aument said Tuesday, I continue to support any legitimate effort to uncover fraud or flaws within our election system that will serve to boost the public's confidence in our election results. This included calls by my opponent for a hand recount of the ballots for the most recent primary election. That's walking a tightrope for you. Aument's written statement continued, I supported this effort despite the margin of victory of nearly 8,400 votes because I'm deeply committed to ensuring my constituents can have faith in election results and processes in our Commonwealth. Unfortunately, Mr. Miller's unwillingness to even collect the results of his right-to-know request after election workers spent several weeks compiling the results show that he has no genuine interest in improving our elections or uncovering fraud, but would rather waste taxpayer resources on political stunts. You see, the tightrope here is this is a Republican incumbent who is essentially saying, this is how you walk the tightrope between saying, yeah, I don't believe Joe Biden's election was legitimate. I'm still on your side with that. But my election is totally legitimate. And the only way you can do that is to say, go ahead, count the ballots. And the fact that he never showed up to count the ballots is proof that he's not even really interested in finding out if Joe Biden's a fraud or something like that, even though it had nothing to do with Joe Biden at this point. But yes, he has been a prior complainer about Joe Biden, so maybe it does have something to do with it. I don't know. But interesting to see Republican incumbents walk that tightrope. That's how it's done, but good find, I thought, and I appreciate Adam's eye on that one. There are other smaller bore local-ish stories here. What am I looking at here? I got something from out of Indiana that I thought was of interest for some reason. Let me go find out why. 2 Indiana officers suspended after arresting a man thought to be anti-police. Oh, yes. This is just sort of an interesting local story. And this is something Trump should have in his back pocket. But really belongs, of course, in the back pocket of people who are tired of having been admonished either for having said, hey, maybe we should think about defunding the police, or worse, people who simply happen to support candidates in common with people who thought it might be a good idea to defund or slightly decrease, maybe go to negative inflation on police budgets for a little while, but who didn't really want to actually defund the police, but have spent all the last year or more having to fight Republican accusations that you really want to defund the police, and after having successfully defended themselves against, to a certain extent, successfully defended themselves, only to find out that Republicans were only too happy to defund the police when the police were coming after them. But anyway, an interesting story that reminds me a little bit of my dad's own political experience in local elections, and taking the side of local citizens who believed that they were being harassed or abused by the police, only to find the police interfering in the election by declaring him to be anti-police, and he wants to get rid of us and defund us, and you should all be voting against him in his bid for re-election to public office. Here, a story in the Washington Post: 2 Indiana officers suspended after arresting a man thought to be anti-police, for which you can't ordinarily be arrested. Merrill Cornfield providing this report dated from yesterday. 2 Indiana officers were suspended after a stunning courtroom revelation that police thought a potential town council candidate, that's what reminded me here, was anti-police, and so arrested him, which, by the way, had the interesting and unfortunate effect of stopping him from running for office. What's this all about? During a July 19th hearing, Franklin County Prosecutor Chris Huerkamp dropped charges that included drug possession against Trevin Thalheimer after an officer and witness recounted how Brookville police talked about Thalheimer. Huerkamp, who also did not pursue a rape charge police had investigated, said he was disturbed beyond words by the alleged police conduct and reported the incident to the Indiana State Police, which launched a criminal investigation. The transcript of the hearing was made public on Monday. Brookville Police Chief Terry Mitchum and the investigating officer Ryan Geiser were suspended with pay. That's a police chief and an investigating officer. Suspended with pay from the 9-person force on Thursday by the town's council, which ordered them to stay away from other officers and town property. The council installed an interim chief in a brief emergency meeting and said it would begin searching for a permanent replacement. And part of the danger of that, of course, is that the rest of the force, were they to come out in support of the chief and this other investigating officer, could now be saying, well, the whole town council is anti-police and needs to be arrested. Thalheimer said he decided not to run in the May 3rd primary race for town council since the arrest rocked his hometown of 2,500 people and consumed his life. Immediately after he got out of jail, where he was held for about an hour, he said he couldn't leave his bed. I don't know what's going on with that, but he said he felt he had been destroyed by the criminal charges, which exacerbated his depression and anxiety. I have a bad taste in my mouth about politics, he said. I knew politics was dirty, but I didn't know I'd have to dumpster dive. The town council president, Curtis Ward, said there has been no finding of wrongdoing and noted the presumption of innocence in criminal cases. Mitchum and Geiser did not respond to requests for comment. Oh, I don't know whether he was saying about Thalheimer or about the police who got suspended here. Not sure what he's talking about. The controversy comes after Brookville police have not worn body cameras, which the town council could require. Hierocamp said they are the only full-time agency in the jurisdiction without any recording devices. The news also coincides with federal prosecutors charging police officers who shot and killed Breonna Taylor with falsifying information, drawing attention to the past cases when police misled judges who signed off on search warrants. You'd be surprised. It's amazing that, by the way, Trump world spent all of the past couple of years saying, oh, Breonna Taylor probably had it coming to her anyway. If she wasn't guilty of this particular crime of which she was supposedly, had supposedly led to the search of, any of these cases. There's 100 cases, not just Breonna Taylor, but how many of people who just were, the police had the wrong address or suspected somebody else at the address, but not that person, but they burst in, like in the Taylor case here, or just generally came in guns blazing even when they had the right person, but they shouldn't have been shooting in the first place. There's cases all over the place, and there are Republicans insisting that you got to be on the side of police, and these people have it coming to them, and then all of a sudden, oh my God, this warrant was served on us. What a tyranny this place has turned into. And brings us back to Peter Baker's discussion of suddenly finding yourself on the short end of the stick, and that maybe that's why we don't like the idea of devolving into authoritarian dictatorships, because sometimes the shoe might end up on the other foot and you find out that it's actually a bad thing, but by then it's too late. Anyway, the news also coincides with federal prosecutors charging police officers, finally, who shot and killed Breonna Taylor with falsifying information and misleading the judge who signs off on the search warrants in that and other cases. After his arrest, it took months before the hearing that cleared Thalheimer's charges. During the hearing, Elise Whittemore, friend of Thalheimer, testified that Geiser called to ask her to run for the seat herself. Who are we talking about? Who's Geiser? I'll have to scroll back to see just how outrageous a thing that is. Yeah, in the investigating officer. What would he be doing trying to recruit another candidate for town council? That's crazy. So, all right, where were we? Geiser called her to ask her to run for the seat herself. He mentioned Thalheimer's interest in the race, saying, we don't want him on the town board because he hates cops. 3 days later, Thalheimer was arrested. I was upset, Whittemore said, about reading in the local news that Geiser, the one who just called her, arrested Thalheimer. Shortly after calling Whittemore, Geiser said he investigated a report from Thalheimer's neighbor that items in his house were stolen and that Thalheimer was supposed to watch the house. Oh, I see. Geiser went to Thalheimer's house and spoke with Thalheimer's roommate and alleged that he smelled marijuana. Dun, dun, dun. He returned with a search warrant on January 30th and arrested Thalheimer because of drugs allegedly found there, but also for a months-old rape allegation that a prosecutor had said he wasn't able to substantiate. I mean, that ain't great. But wow. Geiser testified that another officer had told him there was new DNA evidence, but Geiser didn't know what that was, and he wasn't an officer on the investigation. He also said he didn't recall mentioning Thalheimer to Whittemore, but he said that he thought Thalheimer did not like police, and that the police chief was not a huge supporter of Thalheimer. The police chief ordered Thalheimer's arrest, Geiser said. From everything that I've heard throughout the law enforcement community is that he wasn't a fan of law enforcement, Geiser said of Thalheimer. So what? But that's what he's saying. Huerkamp cross-examined Geiser, asking him how he came to the unusual step of lodging a rape charge without seeing DNA evidence or consulting anyone in the prosecutor's office. Did that make you feel uneasy that your department was, didn't this case feel just a little bit too close to you, considering, what was going on? The prosecutor asked. Not the best and sharpest question. Yeah, the officer said. Okay, and yet today is the first time that a lot of this is coming out to the surface, isn't it? Huerkamp asked. Yes, Geiser answered. Indiana State Police spokesman Stephen Wheels, or Wheelies, perhaps, W-H-E-E-L, Wheel-E-S, Wheelies, declined to comment further about the criminal investigation, saying it is in its earliest stages. If state police find any employees of the Brookville Police Department committed a criminal violation, charges would be filed with the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office, or a special prosecutor could be appointed. Thalheimer said he is looking into pursuing a civil rights claim against the police department at a time when the Supreme Court has made it easier to sue police over wrongful arrests. Is that right? Is that the way you would describe it? Thalheimer said he had never considered himself anti-police before this experience. He said he and his criminal defense attorney, Judson McMillan, have wondered whether the police were concerned that he would have been in favor of requiring officers to wear body cameras. That's not really being anti-police. McMillan said Thalheimer is not his only client to face false or exaggerated charges. Still, he said it's highly unusual that the prosecutor stepped in to stop the case, as Huerkamp did, in a legal maneuver McMillan said he has seen just twice in 20 years. Huerkamp said this is the first time he joined a defense motion to suppress charges. That's the scary part, is that these things are happening everywhere, McMillan said. And they are. And only now do Donald Trump and the law and order, quote-unquote law and order crowd, see that this is a real possibility, because, of course, it would help them avoid charges of their own. Isn't that amazing? Well, that's what it takes to get a Republican to rise to the defense of civil rights. As I've pointed out in the past on the show, that I had that professor back in law school who said that the old joke used to run that a conservative is a liberal who's been mugged, and that the counterpoint to that was that a liberal was a conservative whose friend has been indicted. I don't know why it was a one-off in being a friend, because now, of course, the conservatives themselves are being indicted, but maybe they didn't want to impute to themselves the fact that they could, in fact, be indicted. All right, time to wrap things up here. Golly, there's so much more. But I did want to add those two interesting items from, more locally focused items. There are, of course, much more about the Mar-A-Lago situation, Empty Wheel writing something of some interest that I'll recommend to you in the minute or so that we have left. Why not read a little bit from it, and we'll read it over the music as the time comes. DOJ's June Mar-A-Lago trip helps prove 18 U.S. Code 793E. We're getting technical and down into the weeds here. What's she talking about? Everyone is squabbling over whether DOJ should release more information on the search of Mar-A-Lago, with entirely reasonable people saying they want the DOJ to have to defend taking documents that the government owns so that we can learn more about what went down. But we may get more clarity more easily than that, and that's because if DOJ has any intention of actually charging Donald Trump for stealing classified information, then obtaining specific documents he stole may be one of the last things they need to do before charging him. So if there are charges coming, they might be coming quickly. That's of some interest. I think all by itself. As Marcy says, as I noted here and here, giving some links, one of the statutes that's likely on the table for the former president is 18 U.S. Code 793E, basically taking national defense information that you're not authorized to have and refusing to give it back. And all the technical language is there, and you can read it for yourself. Regular readers of this site are familiar with this statute because I've covered it, tons of cases charging it. Reality Winner, for one, is someone who was facing charges under that statute, and Hal Martin and Joshua Schulte, among others. But I went back and some pattern jury instructions, took a look at those for the unlawful retention charge. And because of that meeting in June, the DOJ has most of what they'd need to charge the former president. Here's what jurors would be asked to decide. This is where it becomes real interesting. Did the defendant without authorization have possession of, access to, or control over a document that was national defense information? Here, yes. The archives spent a year telling him he was not authorized to have it under the Presidential Records Act. Did the document in question relate to national defense? Well, we don't know what the documents in question are, but given the Washington Post description in February, then absolutely. And as a bonus fact, if the jury decides that something was national defense information, NDI, not the former original, the jury will decide, rather, whether or not it is NDI, not the former original classification authority. The fancy term for the president gets to decide whether something is classified or not. So, if the agency whose document Trump stole is still trying to protect it from hostile powers, if that agency still believes it's classified, if it remains secret, then a jury is likely to find that it is NDI, despite this whole insta-declassification thing. Lots more interesting stuff from the jury instructions you can take a look at for yourself.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, if you're not quite ready to take a look at these things for yourself and you want somebody to tell you more about what they think about what's in the news, you're in luck, because Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy are next. And yes, there'll be more about what went on at Mar-A-Lago and more about the infuriating Lindsey Graham and what he's been up to and trying to weasel out of the Georgia situation.